Can sex grow, expand, and get better over time in a long-term relationship? My name is Irene Fehr, sex coach for committed couples. What I have found working with hundreds of couples is that there are three kinds of sex that couples find themselves in a long-term relationship, two of which we default into and inevitably find our passion and sexual desire waning over time. These two kinds of sex self-destruct in a long-term relationship by virtue of their design. In these two types of sex, most couples will think that there's something wrong with them or their connection. Women might think that there's something wrong with their bodies for losing their libido in a long-term relationship. And couples will begin to doubt their compatibility. The truth is that there's nothing wrong with them or you if you relate to any of this. In fact, they did everything right given what they knew with the tools they had. It's simply that these two kinds of sex do not work in a long-term relationship. Now, there is a third type of sex that does. Sex that allows for both sexual passion and intimacy in a long-term relationship. And this is sustainable and ever-evolving as the couple grows together. In this video training, I'm going to tell you about these three types of sex, how couples get caught in the spiral of each, and lay out the roadmap to creating a sustainable long-term sexual relationship that is exciting, passionate, and intimate. Curious? Keep watching this video, and as you do, think about what aspects of sex you deeply desire for yourself and your relationship. Then sign up for consultation to get your roadmap and the support you need to make this come true in your relationship. As I think of these three types of sex, I think along the lines of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the needs we have as human beings. At the bottom, you have our most fundamental needs, driven by our nature, our biology, and hormones. At the top, you have our most evolved needs, driven by our spirit. At the bottom, basic needs for procreation and management of sexual urges drive sex, which is why I call this type of sex friction sex. This is sex that's driven by our desire for sexual gratification. Here, pleasure, orgasm, and release are ends in themselves. And there's a focus on sensation and performance and climax, or orgasm, the presence of which determines the success of the encounter. This can be incredibly passionate, fun, pleasurable, and even erotic sex, especially with a new partner or at the start of a relationship. It's driven by usually high sexual attraction, a cocktail of hormones, or high desire for sexual release, all of which make sex hot here. The classic case scenarios for friction sex are one-night stands, booty calls, or sex at the beginning of a relationship where you cannot keep your hands off each other. Friction sex can be exciting and pleasurable, but there are limits to it, and this is what I call diminishing returns. Because the main focus is on sensation and performance, mainly orgasm, bonding, connection, quality of expression are often secondary, making friction sex one-dimensional. In a one-night stand, there may be an emotional connection. You may feel attracted to your partner, but there's no caring for them. You don't necessarily have deeper feelings for them. In a case of a long-term relationship, there may be walls that you have built up around your emotions for fear of intimacy or sharing yourself more deeply with your partner. With this single dimensionality, friction sex becomes repetitive pretty quickly as you get to learn what gets you to the goal as quickly as and efficiently, the goal being the orgasm, and you repeat it over and over. It can also feel transactional. I rub your back, you rub mine. I give you an orgasm, you give me mine. Most women will see diminishing returns in friction sex usually after the third time. She'll become bored with the routine. Her body starts to respond less and less to the stimulation. She can often lose lubrication and require lube. Her body might tighten and penetration might become painful, which basically says that, hey, this type of sex is not working for me. Men are more tolerant of this kind of sex, but they'll also see diminishing returns. Because there's a lack of richness in each sexual encounter, they'll need more and more to be satisfied. So it'll look like their libido is raging and they want more sex, but it's really that they're trying to substitute quantity for quality. Both partners will see diminishing returns over time, and it will feel like hard work to get the same amount of pleasure over time. The result is that couples who get caught in this kind of downward spiral will spend thousands of dollars on toys, vibrators, new ways of twisting their bodies into a pretzel to get more pleasure out of each encounter, only to see diminishing returns. So they'll conclude that either they've lost the spark, or they're not sexually compatible, or they've lost sexual attraction to each other. But the truth is that friction sex is just that. It's about the physical. And there's little beyond it without the addition of emotional intimacy and openness. In friction sex, there's no space or capacity for emotionality, no room for voicing true feelings or disappointments. In fact, they might even kill the mood if you start sharing your feelings or expressing anything other than what relates to the fun or the pleasure. In fact, this is good weather sex. It works as long as you're having fun. And most couples who experience this in a long-term relationship prefer to keep their eyes shut to avoid seeing what might distract them from that fun and pleasure. But this kind of sex has limits in a long-term relationship. One or both partners will want more connection at some point, as well as depth of relating past the physical. Of course, bumps will come up in any sex life, which require difficult conversations and asking for what you want. And that lack of emotionality or lack of access to more than good weather emotions will prevent them from actually connecting deeply in this kind of sex. Women also find this kind of sex especially hard because they need emotional safety to truly open up to their partners. So a lot of women will keep it clean and zipped up and might look frigid in order to keep this kind of sex going. A lot of women lose their sexual desire here if the majority of sex they have is friction sex, because simply this kind of sex does not work for women's bodies long term. Often couples are able to maintain this kind of sex under the influence of drugs or alcohol, which allows them to shut off their emotions and just focus on the physical. But they might find it challenging to switch out of that in the long term. There is another time when couples resort to friction sex, and I'll come back to that shortly. Now we move on to the next level of sex. And this is sex that's driven by our human need for love, connection, acceptance, validation. We usually experience this kind of sex in a romantic relationship as we develop deeper feelings towards our partners. Here, sex and sexual desire come from wanting to be with our partners, to love them, to desire them, to merge with them, to please them, to show how important they are to us, and want the same from them. This can be incredibly connecting and loving sex that feels like a warm blanket around you. You feel your partner's love, affection, and desire and express the same. With a stronger bond, what also starts to happen is that we begin to develop a deeper desire to keep our partners. And with that comes a fear of losing them. And we begin to demand validation from our partners, not merely want it. This is why I call the second type of sex validation sex. Through every action, in every word, desire, request, we seek the answers to, do you love me? Do you care for me? Am I important to you? When the answer is positive, it feels amazing and sex is beautiful. Inevitably, however, things show up as your partner rejects your sexual advances because they're tired or cranky or mad at you, or you have to reject their advances for the same reasons. And these rejections are taken personally. It starts to feel like your warm blanket is being taken away. There's no true no in validation sex because a no is taken like a personal rejection. As a result, sex becomes a battleground for attachment struggles. The more avoidant partner might pull away from connection and sex. The more ambivalent partner, the more anxious partner might want more, and sex starts to look like a demand and a chore. Underneath the struggle is a lack of security. both inner and outer security, without which partners cannot take true risks to make this kind of sex anything but a game of validation. It becomes too much risk for women, for example, to ask for what they truly want for their bodies, to be able to get aroused and to surrender to their partners and fully enjoy sex. They might be scared to displease their partner or scare their partner off because it might take too much time. Or they don't take risks to tell their partner that something is not working. And that becomes often the cause of a lot of pain that women feel during penetration sex because of a lack of proper arousal. So women end up not getting the pleasure that they want and need for sex to be worth wanting, and they pull away, noticing that their sexual desire wanes. For men, it's different, and it becomes too risky for men to show their real aggressive sex drive for fear of scaring women away with the magnitude of their sexual desire, especially if they see her pulling away. So they become less forthcoming, less willing to take charge and create an exciting and passionate and risky environment for the woman to surrender in. This lack of ability or lack of willingness to take risks on both sides kills the passion. This is sex with your eyes intentionally closed because it's too scary to let your partner see you. And it's too scary to look at your partner's eyes for fear of seeing that they don't want you. What might happen here is either a perpetual cycle of one person pursuing the other for sex and the other retreating, both partners building up walls of hurt and resentment towards each other. Or sex becomes so fraught with emotional anxiety that couples will avoid it altogether, choosing cuddling over sex, which provides the validation minus the anxiety. They become roommates and sex dies. Alternatively, one person becomes someone else to please their partner, giving up what they want and need to not rock the boat. And sex becomes automatic, going through the motions simply to avoid not letting the person down. In the process, they shut themselves off from being fully present during sex, or they just simply go straight to the orgasm, thinking, well, it's not passionate, connected sex. Let's just go for the orgasm and get it over with. Remember, I mentioned there's another case scenario where friction sex shows up for couples. This is where couples resort to friction sex because it's easier than dealing with a sticky situation where you have to face your own fears and emotions and then share them with your partner. Here, couples will often collude by keeping silence about what's going on for them in order to avoid these difficult conversations because it is challenging to face them without the right tools for intimate connection. And even though romantic sex may have started with a desire for closeness, closeness and sex themselves become demands for validation, abetted by fear and anxiety. And as such, there's no safety here to be who you are or experience or express what you're truly experiencing because everything is weighed against the risk of losing your partner. There's no true eroticism or openness here, and no room to express anything but feel-good emotions or desires that will please your partner. The result here is that couples will conclude that the spark is gone, and they'll try to go on date nights to rekindle the romance, which will prove useless. It isn't that the romance is gone. It's that the demands of romance overshadow the connection and the eroticism that is possible and that is needed to create sex that comes from desire, not need for validation. What couples need to address here is the big elephant in the room, the buildup of resentment and fears. And they need to restore vulnerability in their relationship, the ability to say what has been unsaid and to ask for what they want, which creates the kind of safe environment to be truly erotically open, passionate, and sexually expressive with your partner. So love can flow freely, not as a demand, but out of desire. Now you've learned these two types of sex, and maybe you see yourselves in these patterns and cycles. and how you may have gotten caught in the vortex of each. Without truly understanding ourselves in these cycles, most of us inevitably land in these two types of sex that, as I mentioned before, self-destruct in a long-term relationship by virtue of their design. There is a third type of sex that is different from the others. It is deliberately created, it is intentional, and it is based on our highest needs to realize our deepest human potential in connection with another person, and to experience a deep and full surrender to something greater beyond ourselves, the sexual connection that gets created by both partners. It is sex that emerges out of connection between partners, that follows what is truly wanting to emerge, what arousal is telling you, what emotions are telling you, what your partner is telling you, and what your desire is telling you. The key to this kind of sex is connection, which is why I call this type of sex connection sex. It is in connection that true eroticism can arise, that love can be expressed and reciprocated freely, where you can be yourself with a full range of emotions and expression. This is sex where you can be with your partner fully and authentically, where you can see them and they can see you, where physical pleasure can arise as a journey, not a destination. It is in connection that possibilities happen. Whereas validation sex limits you to warm and fuzzy sex that validates or else, and whereas friction sex limits you to eyes closed sex without emotions or depth and richness of connection, connection sex is sex with your eyes fully open, where you get to bring your body, heart, and soul into the mix and create the sex that fills you up in that moment and that leaves you feeling satisfied, fulfilled, and nourished. Connection sex is categorized by these 4 cornerstones. First one is safety, inner and outer safety, to be truly risky with each other, to be an individual with your own desires in a relationship, and to feel safe to ask for what you want, to express yourself, and to surrender to your partner. The second cornerstone is vulnerability, to be able to express yourself truly, your desires, your feelings, your inner world, which brings risks that fuels passion in a long-term relationship, the risk to actually say what's really true for you. The third cornerstone is moment-by-moment attunement to yourself and your partner through presence and being in your body, as opposed to being in your head or in fantasy. And the fourth cornerstone is the most important one to creating erotic, exciting, passionate sex, and that's desire, the driver of eroticism, which is the question of what do you want? It is in this container created by these cornerstones that anything can arise to create an exciting sex life, from warm and fuzzy romantic sex to hot, passionate pleasure, to kinky exploration and play, to spiritual merging. You cannot just default into this kind of sex. You have to create it intentionally and consciously with tools for intimacy, connection, as well as understanding of sexuality and yourself and your anatomy. It requires an erotic discovery journey of yourself, your partner, and these cornerstones of connection. Connection sex also requires true commitment to keeping your heart open and your sex open no matter what. So you can access higher reaches of arousal, ride the waves, and experience expansion and pleasure in connection like never before. If you're called to experience connection sex in your relationship, current or future, sign up below for a free consultation to get a personalized roadmap on how to make this happen in your life.